Thank you very much to Valve for sending me an early Steam controller for this accessibility-focused review. I hope you'll forgive a short diversion, but I want to start this review by discussing a piece of gaming hardware from 2015. The first generation Steam controller, released 11 years ago, was a fascinating but niche piece of technology that I was a pretty big defender of. It was also designed in such a way that it could never have been my primary or exclusive PC controller of choice. The controller featured a single analog stick, A, B, X and Y face buttons, bumpers, triggers, and two large circular touch panels, one plain and one inlaid with a D-pad style cross pattern. Back in 2015, this controller was fantastic when applied to specific niche use cases. It worked well for point-and-click adventure games or RTS titles that needed mouse pointer input. It was a solid choice for PC games that lacked proper controller support, and was a good pick for MMOs that had controller support but still needed occasional mouse inputs. It didn't work so well for third-person adventure games that wanted a true second analog stick, and it was pretty terrible for any game that relied heavily on D-pad directional inputs. Fighting games and side-scrolling platformers were basically unplayable, and meant that a more traditional controller would always need to be on hand. Still, it had its use cases. There were genres for which its weird bespoke control scheme was the best tool for the job. Skipping forward to 2026, and the second generation Steam controller is now out in the wild, or near enough. At the time of writing this review draft, the controller has been available to order for about 24 hours, but as far as I know the general public generally don't have the unit in their hands yet. I've had my hands on the Steam controller since the start of this week, and have spent the past 3 days playing a wide variety of genres of games with it. I'm certain my feelings on the controller will evolve over time, but I think I've had long enough with it to have a solid idea of how I feel about the final retail version of the device. The basic non-accessibility surface facts and impressions. The Generation 2 Steam controller, which I will just call the Steam controller going forward, retails for $99 US or £85 here in the UK. This makes it roughly £35 more than a standard Xbox Series controller, and £20 more than the basic standard PS5 DualSense controller. The price is definitely premium compared to its two closest PC controller competitors, but it does have a number of unique features packed in to try and justify that cost. At its core, the Steam controller feels pretty comparable in quality, size, and weight to its competition. Its closest direct comparison is an Xbox Series controller, with a very slight weight increase, a little flatter, and with the plastic in the centre extended to further down the grips, giving a slightly more square shape. It's easy at a glance to look at the Steam controller and compare it to the Steam Deck, with its screen removed and the two halves brought together. That's not an unfair comparison to make. In many ways it does feel and behave like a screenless Steam Deck, but there are ergonomic improvements that the comparison does a disservice to. The plastic on the Steam controller will feel very familiar to Steam Deck users, as will the chime sound that the home button makes and the basic layout of buttons. The controller features a D-pad and ABXY buttons, two analog sticks, and two touch trackpads laid out in basically the same configuration as the Steam Deck, but a little more ergonomically arranged. I'm not someone with particularly large hands, and I found that the controller's inputs were close enough together to reach between them without needing to rearrange my grip position. Going from analog sticks to buttons to trackpads could all be done with relative ease for me from a neutral position. The buttons themselves are a tiny bit larger than those on the Steam Deck, but we're talking at most a 1mm difference. The buttons are fairly low resistance to press, and very quiet when pushed. The D-pad is much closer in feel and sound to a DualSense D-pad than an Xbox D-pad, not featuring the Xbox controller's tactile and audible click. After general testing, I would say that the D-pad and face buttons on the Steam controller are probably the quietest of the three main controllers that I tested. The Steam controller D-pad is also very reliable in terms of its inputs. I put it through its paces attempting motion inputs in fighting games, and had decent reliability inputting moves. I also rarely, if ever, noticed accidental diagonal movements registering in Precision 2D titles. The Steam controller also features two bumpers, which reliably register inputs no matter where they're pressed, two analog triggers, which are fairly low resistance, and a total of 4 additional buttons on the back of the controller, 2 on each side. These back buttons were perhaps a little low for my tastes, resting closest to my ring finger and pinky fingers, but were pronounced enough to easily find by touch, and provided just enough resistance to not accidentally trigger unintentionally. The analog sticks are something called TMR sticks, which stands for Tunnel Magnetoresistance. I won't pretend to understand how the tech works, but from a quick search online, the headline seems to be stick drift resistant like Hall effect sticks are, but less power hungry than that technology. By default, the sticks are rounded, with an indent in the top. They feel decent, and I have little reason not to believe the claims about their drift resistance or input reliability. The big selling point of the Steam controller, compared to the competition, is obviously the presence of 2 touchpads below the analog sticks. These small squares, in practice, feel very comparable to those on the Steam Deck, in terms of accuracy, sensitivity, and haptic feedback. As someone who likes the touchpad support on the Steam Deck, there's basically nothing different here that I want to complain about. They are slightly angled rather than being directly straight up, and I'll talk a little bit about the ramifications of that later in this review. General thought, I do think it's very easy to accurately do an up movement, even if you're not moving strictly toward the top of the controller. Lastly, there's a few types of input on the Steam controller that are not well advertised, but are worth noting. The analog sticks are capacitive, meaning that they can tell when your thumb is resting on top of them. This is different from L3 and R3, you don't need to click the sticks in for them to register this input. This is an additional way of registering input without moving a stick. The controller supports gyro, allowing for aiming or mouse control via motion. Most interesting and unique, perhaps, is that the controller can tell when you're holding the left or right grip of the controller, and you can map inputs to gripping or letting go of one side of the device. While letting go of one side of the controller doesn't feel like it has any immediately obvious uses, in my first few days with the controller, I found myself mapping letting go of the left grip so that it hits the start button and pauses the game, allowing games to basically pause themselves if I put the controller down. While not vital as an input for me, I do think it has some interesting accessibility potential. The controller battery has a decent capacity at around 30 hours from a full charge, but does not support audio pass-through for wired headsets. How is the Steam controller to actually use as your primary PC controller? If you're someone who primarily plays PC games via Steam, the Steam controller is, perhaps unsurprisingly, incredibly well supported right out the box. If you play games on other storefronts, things might be a little less smooth. The Steam controller can be connected to a PC via either a wired USB-C connection, Bluetooth pairing, or via a small magnetic charging and wireless connection puck. The latter has been my default way of using the controller. It provides a rock-solid wireless connection over good distances, and makes charging the controller while playing really simple. The puck's magnetic connection is strong enough that it's easy to pop into place by touch without looking at the back of the controller, but also not so strong that it's likely to provide a major access barrier when disconnecting for most users. Perhaps most importantly, as I know I'm forgetful and clumsy, this controller configuration does a great job of reducing the risk of damaged ports on the PC or controller. I've numerous times over the years damaged controllers or USB ports by accidentally yanking a controller cable unintentionally while gaming, and the magnetic puck provides an obvious breakpoint in the design, which will detach before any damage is done to the controller. When in a full-screen version of Steam, such as Big Picture Mode or SteamOS, the controller functions exactly the same as the controls on a Steam Deck in terms of navigation, menu access, and basic functionality. Controller profiles for games that you've previously played on the Steam Deck will automatically be applied by default to your Steam controller when first booting up a game on PC. But the same will not happen in reverse for games that you first play on the Steam controller, presumably because the Steam controller supports new inputs such as grip sensing, which wouldn't be supported on the Steam Deck, and therefore the profile doesn't move the other direction. Games booted via Steam are able to access all features of the Steam controller. Games not booted via Steam are a slightly different matter. When not playing a Steam game, or not in Steam Big Picture Mode or SteamOS, by default the Steam controller falls back to something that Valve are calling Lizard Mode. Rather than being registered as an Xbox controller with some bespoke control inputs disabled, the controller instead functions primarily as a mouse. Either trackpad can be used to move the mouse cursor, with L2 and R2 acting as the left and right mouse click inputs. This may be sufficient for browsing media on your TV, or playing games with simple inputs, such as some classic point-and-click adventure games. If you want to use this as a fully featured controller for non-Steam games, you've got a couple of options available. You can use a program called SISR, or Steam Input System Redirector, to basically trick your PC into seeing the controller as an Xbox controller when outside of Steam. This will work system-wide, but won't give you access to the trackpads, the touch grip inputs, gyro controls, etc. The alternative is that you can add your non-Steam games into Steam. Launching the exe for a game via Steam gets you access to that full suite of options that you presumably purchased this controller in order to have access to. Mileage will vary on how much of a barrier that's going to feel like for you. I stopped subscribing to Xbox Game Pass a while ago, and I mostly use the Epic Game Store to download their free game offerings. As such, for me, adding the occasional itch.io executable to Steam isn't a huge barrier. The controller can be used to wake up a Windows PC from sleep, which can be useful if you're using the controller as a mouse replacement for a PC media center in the living room. My biggest complaint back in the day about the first generation Steam controller was that there were a number of genres it simply wasn't a good fit for, and in practice that meant it was never going to be my default controller on the platform. It had niche uses, but it wouldn't replace a standard controller completely in my setup. By comparison, the new Steam controller basically fixes all of the major issues that I had with the original. It's got 2 analog sticks and a proper D-pad, without compromising the value that the trackpads bring to a controller. This is going to, from here on out, likely be my default controller for most PC gaming. It's got touch and gyro to help emulate mouse input on the sofa, a quiet and accurate D-pad and buttons, a solid battery life and wireless connection, and a good variety of places to map additional controller inputs to. It's a little more expensive than an Xbox or PS5 controller, but I appreciate the additional features that it offers. I don't know if I would have paid £85 for a Steam controller, as someone who already had the option of a DualSense and an Xbox Series controller to use on my PC, but if I lost all of my past controllers tonight in some dramatic accident, and I had to pick up a replacement PC controller tomorrow, I suspect I would go for the Steam controller if it wasn't sold out. Accessibility. Unboxing, teardown, repairs, and modding. The outermost box that the Steam controller ships in is secured shut with tape. Once inside, the main box is secured shut with a thin cardboard strip with small unsecured edges. While the edges of the cardboard pull tab are small and may be hard for some users to initially grip, the strength required to pull the strip once gripped is fairly minimal. Once inside the packaging, the controller and dongle are immediately able to be picked up from the lower packaging. A large hole in the top cardboard is used to lift a flap revealing the included USB-C cable, which is held in position using a cardboard loop rather than twist ties. The cardboard can be slid off one end of the cable, rather than needing to be pulled apart or torn open. In terms of opening up the physical outer shell of the controller, the back plate is held in place by 7 star-shaped screws. Some of the screw holes are deep and narrow, requiring a screwdriver with a lengthy and thin profile. This may make unscrewing some of these screws slightly tricky, as the lengthy nose and thin handle in combination can make initially getting traction to start turning the screw a little challenging. Once the screws are removed, there are no plastic clips holding the back shell to the main body. Unlike many other electronics, the Steam Deck included, you won't need to use a pry tool such as a spudger to pry the 2 halves of the plastic shell apart, a common area of difficulty for disabled gamers looking to remove electronics casing. There are additionally no ribbon cables connecting the rear shell to the main body, meaning that the backplate can be removed without requiring dexterity to avoid damage. The battery is easy to access once the back panel is off, with no glue holding it in place. Replacing the battery should be fairly easy for any user who's able to unscrew the screws holding the back panel in place. The ribbon cables to connect the main rumble motors are also accessible without further controller disassembly. The general interior layout of the controller is pretty easy to understand, and compared to other controllers, it's on the simpler end in terms of dexterity required for disassembly. The analog sticks on the Steam controller are unfortunately soldered to the board, and as such they're not able to be easily replaced. However, the thumb caps that pop through the outer shell of the controller to interact with can be removed from the analog stick pivot mechanism, meaning that it should be possible to design a custom thumbstick topper replacement. This would require mostly disassembling the controller, which for some users may require some assistance. I do not at present have 3D print specifications to help folks design replacement analog toppers or to know precisely what fitting is needed to put a new topper on, but I do suspect that that will become possible in future. Replacing the analog stick toppers will disable the capacitive touch functions of the analog sticks, meaning that the controller will no longer be able to sense if your thumb is touching the analog stick gently, and treat that as a possible input option. Valve staff have indicated to me that they plan to make 3D print files for the Steam controller's shell available fairly close to launch, although they were not specific about precisely when that might be. Their intention is to make these files available to assist in creating accessibility-focused mod projects. For example, there is no screw mount thread on the back of the controller, but someone could use their upcoming 3D print files to create a new backplate for the controller with something like a fitting to screw a mount into. Replacing the backplate with a custom 3D printed alternative looks like it would be theoretically simple, and I do believe that Valve are sincere in their desire to help facilitate disabled users, making more accessible alternative shells for the controller. I hope that Valve will also provide 3D print files to assist players who wish to design new thumbstick toppers. Accessibility, physical use and software. In terms of one-handed use, the Steam controller is, as cliché as it is to say, a mixed bag. The controller lacks as default a mounting thread, and is slightly larger and heavier than its competition to hold with a single hand, but it does feature a wide variety of extra buttons and reprogrammable inputs, which are useful for mapping all needed controls to a single side of the device. One might, for example, map one of the L4 or L5 back buttons on the left side of the controller as a toggle, switching the function of the left analog stick to make it perform like a right analog stick temporarily. They might additionally program the left D-pad to function like their A, B, X, Y buttons, and map lesser used functions to a radial menu on the left touchpad. I'll explain how the radial menu works in a little bit. In terms of general comfort during lengthy play sessions, I have found the Steam controller considerably more comfortable and ergonomic than the Steam Deck is during extended play sessions. I suspect this is a combination of reduced weight from the lack of screen, but also because the controller grips are pointed in at a more naturally comfortable angle to hold, with their buttons placed in less strenuous to reach positions. If you're a user who needs to use the Steam controller in a rotated orientation, you'll be glad to know that both the analog sticks and touchpads can have their north orientation rotated 180 degrees either clockwise or anti-clockwise. The Steam controller cannot at present be used alongside a second controller as a single input user. See Xbox Controller Assist mode or connecting multiple PlayStation Access controllers to a PS5 at the same time. Valve are aware of interest in this feature, but do not support it at present. For users who struggle with rumble or haptic feedback, both can be disabled on a software level when using the controller within Steam's ecosystem. If you're someone who would prefer to physically disable rumble and haptics on the hardware level, that is possible, with caveats. Disabling the main rumble motors on a hardware level is pretty simple. Unscrew the back faceplate and unplug two easy-to-spot ribbon cables. Disabling the touchpad haptics on a hardware level is more complicated, and is not advised by Valve. I messaged Valve to ask how someone would go about doing so, on the request of a disabled gamer who needed to avoid haptic feedback when using the controller outside of Steam, and I received the following response. Our recommendation for disabling the haptics on the trackpads is to do it through the controller settings page. Physically disabling the haptics on the trackpads is non-trivial and will require a permanent modification that would void the warranty of the controller. However, if someone wanted to do it, they would need to follow these instructions. Open the back case by removing the 7 T6 screws from the back of the case. Remove the battery. remove the 0402 resistor that connects trackpad haptic enable at location R163 per the image below. And then they provided the image that's on screen. This will disable the electrical drive signal to the haptic motors behind each trackpad with this single part removal. The haptic motors on the trackpads are not connectorized, unlike the motors in the grips, so this is the easiest way to disable them electrically. While the above is obviously not terribly accessible and would void your warranty, I do appreciate Valve being willing to provide instructions and illustrations, regardless, on how doing so would be possible for disabled gamers for whom this would be a barrier to the controller's use. The fact that they're willing to talk through the steps of how to do something warranty breaking on a disabled gamer's request and provide that instruction is a really good sign. Any inputs that you're worried you might activate by accident on the controller, such as touchpads, analog stick touch, back buttons, grip sensors, etc., can be disabled in Steam's software. If using the Steam controller within Steam's ecosystem, there's a number of other software-level accessibility options available to players. While many of these settings are useful from an accessibility perspective, they're also in theory available to players using other brands of controller if they allow those controllers to function with Steam's input system. These are only exclusive to the Steam controller in cases where they reference hardware that is unique to the controller. Gyro on the Steam controller can be mapped to function as an emulated mouse or joystick input. Either touchpad can be set to function as a mouse or a joystick, with wide amounts of additional variation. Each trackpad can have its up direction rotated up to 180 degrees, clockwise or anti-clockwise. Either touchpad can also be programmed to act as a radial menu or a touch menu / hotbar / scroll wheel. These options allow for a wide number of inputs to be mapped to a single touch-sensitive region of the controller. In theory, for a turn-based game using A, B, X, Y, and D-pad directional inputs, all game inputs could be accessed from a single touchpad by touching points around a circle, seeing those selections represented on screen, and clicking the touchpad to confirm an input. Button presses on the Steam controller can be tweaked to function as a single regular press of a button, a double press, a long press, set to start or release a press, or be set as a button chord, where the button will only activate if a different button is also held. You can also set buttons to activate a command made up of multiple inputs, set a button to activate repeatedly if held, a turbo function, and to toggle on and off when pressed. These functions are not unique to this controller, but are supported on it. Overall / personal accessibility impressions. After my first 3 days with the Steam controller, I'm decently happy with it from an accessibility perspective, compared to other first-party controllers not designed primarily for accessibility. While there are some aspects I would have loved to have seen out of the box that are not supported, such as a screw thread for users needing to mount the device, I am pretty pleased with how open and communicative Valve has been about working toward fixes for accessibility barriers. The fact they're making 3D print files available for their shell components in the near future, and were willing to provide warranty-breaking modification instructions upon request to solve a very specific use case, does make me feel like Valve really does want to make the effort that's needed to help make hardware modification of the controller possible, and support the custom controller modification scene's accessibility efforts. The packaging for the controller is relatively accessible by the standards of non-accessibility focused devices, avoiding many of the cardinal sins of inaccessible packaging, for example, cable ties, tape, and hard-to-open packets. While a lot of the software-side accessibility support isn't exclusive to this controller, the unique physical aspects of the controller do pair really well with Steam's controller customization suite. Being able to map a huge number of inputs to a single touchpad is great as a tool for facilitating one-handed play, and does a lot to help with repositioning inaccessible inputs for other types of setup. While the controller is a little heavier and larger than other comparable controllers, its sheer number of input options make it feel more premium than its closest competition. For the additional cost compared to an Xbox Series or PS5 controller, you do get access to a lot more tools and options that open up unique avenues for creating accessible control schemes. While this controller isn't going to be necessary for everyone, I can see a lot of use cases that it makes more accessible. Broadly, it's a well laid out standard controller, with a good number of customizable inputs and custom options to map inputs to. It doesn't have any of the obvious genre weaknesses of the Generation 1 Steam controller, and retains all of the benefits that made the original such an interesting prospect. It's convenient to charge with a magnetic breakaway to avoid accidental damage, features all of the standard controller inputs that most games need, as well as being uniquely useful for point-and-click adventure games, MMOs, shooters, and older games without solid controller support. As someone who already owned an Xbox Series and PS5 controller, I wasn't sure if I needed another controller in my life for PC gaming. Now it's here, I can't see myself defaulting to anything but the Steam controller when playing PC games on the sofa.